Kiddushin Daf Lamed Vav is divided in half by a Mishnah and ends off with an additional Mishnah. In the first half of the Daf, before the first Mishnah, is discussing the halacha of Isi, that women are pater on the Isser of making bald spots in mourning. The Gemara will continue the discussion as to what Isi's source is with Abaye's opinion and Rava's opinion. We'll get to the Mishnah that discusses which halachas of karbanos apply to women, and that'll take us to the Mishnah which ends off the daf. So let's begin. The Gemara has brought the halacha of Isi that says that the Isser of lo yikru karcha b'rosham, which says both by Yisraelim and by Kahanim, the pasuk lo yikru karcha b'rosham says by Kahanim, and it continues upazik kanam lo yigalechu v'v'saram lo yisru sarates. That's by Kahanim, and by Yisraelim it says so those two psukim, the Isser of making bald spots in mourning, which is Maisa and Mairi, says Isi that Isser only applies to men and doesn't apply to women. The Gemara is trying to discuss where is the source for that. The Gemara has already brought one approach, and the Gemara brings Abaye. Abaye says because by the Bnei Aharon, the one that said to Kahanim, it says Daber El Bnei Aharon, and therefore it's only referring to the sons of Aaron and not the daughters of Aaron, therefore it's only referring to men. And it also says karcha in that pasuk, and it says karcha in the pasuk referring to Yisraelim. We have Gzeira Shava karcha, just like the one by Kahanim is only referring to men, the one by Yisraelim is also only referring to men. Now, the weakness with this issue is the same one we had when we tried it similarly, but on the last daf, which is the pasuk of Bnei Aharon is said in the beginning of the parsha, and you have a number of halachos there. So how do we know that this lo yikru karcha b'rosham is included in the Bnei Aharon, that it only applies to the men and not to the women? There are other things in between. So the Gemara says that it would seem that the reason that we assume that is because we have a drasha of karcha, which seems to be an extra, like the Torah went out of its way to give us the word karcha to make the drasha. However, had we not had the drasha, we would have said that it's not part of it. The reason we assume that you could apply the Bnei Aharon to this is because otherwise, what else is this drasha teaching us? Now, the Gemara emphasizes this by saying, why do we need the drasha of karcha? Why don't we just say we learn it with the Kavach Chaimer? That if the Isser by Kahanim applies only to men, and Kahanim have stronger mitzvahs because they have more mitzvahs and they apply in more places, then Kavach Chaimer, the one that says by Yisraelim, should apply only to men because Yisraelim have fewer mitzvahs than Kahanim, and it should apply in less places. So that Kavach Chaimer is not enough, because I would have said that in response to that, I would have said, yeah, that would be a true Kavach Chaimer, but how do you know that when it says Bnei Aharon, it's including this Isser of karcha, of lo yikru karcha b'rosham? Maybe it's only referring to which was said right afterwards, which is not to be matamil mace. So says the Gemara, obviously the reason why you don't want to say that is because you're asking what's the Gzeira Shava for, and obviously the Gzeira Shava is doing something. It must be teaching me that the halacha of Bnei Aharon and not Bnei Aharon refers to this also, and it's teaching me that it applies only to men and not to women. You can learn that from Kahanim to Leviim. Says the Gemara, the problem with that cheshbon is that there's something else you could do with the drasha. The Gemara quotes a brisa that has something else that we do with this drasha. The brisa says that karcha teaches me three halachas. First of all, in the pasuk of Yisraelim, it says bein einechem, that don't make a bald spot between your eyes, meaning on your forehead, located between your eyes. In the pasuk of Kahanim, it says b'rosham, anywhere on the head. We learn from Kahanim to Yisraelim through this Gzeira Shava that the Isser is not only in the eyes and the forehead, it's anywhere in the head. The second halacha that we learn from this Gzeira Shava is that the Isser is even if you make only one bald spot, because it says lo yikru karcha, even if you have just one. If I would have not said that, I would have said that it's lo yikru, don't make a plural amount of bald spots. You're not over until you make like 4 or 5. Now, I also learned one halacha the other way, from the pasuk of Yisraelim to the pasuk of Kahanim. That's the pasuk of Yisraelim specifically says it's only referring to lemeis. My Kahanim doesn't say that, but I learned from Yisraelim to Kahanim that this Isser is only lemeis. Anyway, the Gemara's point is that the drasha, this Gzeira Shava, is used for something else, and therefore you have nothing extra. You cannot prove that the pasuk of Bnei Aharon is meant to be referring to this halacha as well, and therefore maybe it's not. So Gemara answers, no, there is something extra, and that's that it did not have to say karcha with a hey. Could have just said kireach. So the extra hey is to teach me this extra limud. Okay, that's all Abaye. The Gemara now brings Rava's source. Rava has a much shorter one. Rava says in the parsha of Karcha by Yisraelim it says bein einechem, and don't make a bold spot bein einechem, between your eyes. It says that by tefillin as well. The sharoi should be l'tei tevois bein einechem. That links the two. Just like women are pater in tefillin, as we've seen earlier in the parak, so too women are pater from this iser of lo yikruchu karcha. Says the Gemara, why did Abaye not want to say that way? Why did Rav not want to say like Abaye? So Abaye didn't want to say the way the Gemara says because you need this clear shalva of bein einechem to teach me the proper place for tefillin. The Torah says put tefillin bein einechem. I don't know if that means between your eyes literally, or up on the forehead, or up on the head. I don't know where between your eyes. I would have thought it means literally between your eyes. But here obviously means on the head, located parallel to the spot between your eyes, because otherwise again we're talking about bald spots. It says not to make a bald spot between your eyes. It has to be the place where there's hair. So too tefillin also has to be in the place where there's hair. Now Rava didn't want to say like Abai because he doesn't hold it with the drasha of the extra hay. According to Abai, you have to say the extra hay drasha, like we said. Rava doesn't hold that the extra hay is there for a drasha. Umar now asks, we had on the last daf we had a third source where it says Banamatam Hashem Lekechem. That was the source of EC, that it applies only to men and not to women, because it says banim, sons. Why did Abaye and Rava not hold of that? So much as they use that for a different drasha to teach you are considered to be children of Hashem. They quote a brisa at the time where you're behaving like children. That's when you're called the children. But if you're not behaving like children, if you're violating these isurim, you're not called children anymore. The brisa says that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Brisa says that the source for that is this Banamatam Hashem Lekechem. Now Rabbi Meir there, the Brisa disagrees. He says whether you're behaving well or you're not behaving like children, either way, Kadosh Baruch Hu calls you his children, calls you his sons, and he brings a series of psukim where we're not behaving properly, but the Torah still calls us sons or children. And the Gemara will explain what each one adds to the one before. So first of all, it says Manim Sichlim Hema, they are foolish children, but it still calls them children. Now you may think that that's only if they are foolish, but how do you know if they're actually not having trust in the Kadosh Baruch Hu? So therefore it says Banim le'imun, children who didn't trust in him. Now how do you know that if they're actually being evident of a desire, they're still called the children? So that we bring another passage where it says Zera Mareim and Banim Mashchisim, children who are destructive, destroying. Later on in the pasuk it says Azvus Hashem Niyatzos Kedesh Yisrael Naziru Achar, they left the Kadosh Baruch Hu Chas v'Shalom. Now you may think that they may be called banim mashchisim, destructive children, but how do you know that they'll be called real children, like good children, if they do tshuva? I know that they could recapture the title of beloved children. So that we bring the next pasuk in Hosea. It says v'hoya misbar b'nei Yisrael k'chol yom asher lo yimad lo yisafer v'hoya b'makom asher yirma lahem lo yami atem yamar lahem b'nei kel chay. We will call you B'nei Kol Chai, the children of the living God. So that shows we can be returned after tshuva and restored to the level of B'nei Kol Chai. We now discuss the next Mishnah. We now begin the next Mishnah, which discusses the halachos of karbanos, and it says that all the avodas of karbanos cannot be performed by women, with two exceptions. So smicha, that is leaning on karbanos; tenufa, waving them; hagasha, bringing them close to the mizbeach; kamitza, taking off a fistful of the carbon mincha; haktara, burning it on the mizbeach; malika, cutting the neck of a bird; carbon; kabbalah, catching the blood; hazah, placing it on the mizbeach. All these things only men can do and not women can do. The only thing on this list that women can do is the tenufa, the waving of two specific carbonates, the mincha of a saita and the mincha of a carbon of a nazira, a female nazir. They wave their own karbanas. Other than that, they can't do any of these. The Gemara now begins, and the Gemara gives the source for all of these. So, smicha, it says, Daber b'nei Yisrael, v'samach b'nei v'samach. So that's only b'nei Yisrael that can do smicha. Tenufa, waving, it says, Daber b'nei Yisrael v'heinif. Only b'nei Yisrael. Hagasha, it says, v'zois teres mincha hakrei v'isa. That's hakrei, that's hagasha, drawing close. It says, hakrei v'isa b'nei aharon, not b'nei Aharon. Kemitza, it says v'hevia el b'nei Aharon v'kamatz. Again, only b'nei Aharon. Haktara, it says v'hektir v'isa b'nei Aharon and not b'nei Aharon. Malika, it says malak v'hektir, and Malika and Haktara are together, just like Haktara, what we said before, is only b'nei Aharon. Malika is also only b'nei Aharon. Kabbalah, it says v'hekrivu b'nei Aharon, and v'hekrivu, we said, refers to Kabbalah Saddam. Now, hazah is a question because there are many ways of applying the blood on the mizbeach. Hazah is only used rarely. Hazah means sprinkling. So, Gemara says, which hazah are we referring to? If we're referring to the sprinkling of the blood of the paraduma, that it says specifically only a lazar, only the kohen gadol can do that. So that's not. We don't need a pasuk to teach me that women can't do that. If it's referring to the one on the pareiches, that's the par kohen Mashiach and the par helim. Davish al tzibur, to special karbonos chatas with special halachos like the ones for Yom Kippur. So again, also that's not a standard kohen can do that. That only the kohen HaMashiach, a special anointed kohen, can do that. So the Gemara says it must be referring to the sprinkling of the blood of a oilas ha'oif, a chatas ha'oif. A chatas ha'oif, it says hazah, its blood is sprinkled instead of smeared, it's sprinkled. So that you would have thought women can do that. It's hazah. It teaches me that they cannot do that. And you learn that from kavachem or from sheep. Sheep, there is no specific kohen who has to do it. Anybody could do the shechita of a sheep, and yet only a kohen could do the application of the blood. So a bird, where it says specifically only a kohen can do the shechita, which is not called shechita, it's called malika. Certainly, only a kohen can do the application of the blood, which is this hazah, and that's the source for that. Okay, now to finish off, how do we know that the woman, the owner of the carbon, does tenufa, the waving on the mincha of a saita and of a nazira? So Gemara quotes an incident. The Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Shaya of his generation. Rashi explains it was an older Rabbi Shaya who had been a chavrus of Rabbi Yona's son, that he was from an earlier generation. So the Gemara specifying not that one, the Rabbi Shaya who was the same generation as Rabbi Eliezer. So he said to him, "Don't sit down until you explain to me pshat in this sugya. How do you know that a mincha saita requires waving?" The Gemara says waving. I mean, it says specifically v'heina v'samincha. No, it means waving by the owner, by the woman who brought the carbon saita. So Gemara says, it's a Rashava, yad from carbon shlomim. Carbon shlomim says, v'lakachakain miyad ha'isha. And here it says, v'lakachakain miyad ha'isha, my shlomim, it says, yadav tevienu. Just like there, the kohen has to do it, so to here, the kohen has to do it. And just like there, the owner has to have his hands on it as well. Here also, she has to have her hands on it as well. So they both put their hands on it, and they both wave it together. Now, this is for saita, heading on nazira. So the word kaf for kapeha, for hands, is used both by saita and by nazira, and that teaches the same halacha. Goes further and applies by nazira as well. Okay, now up to the next Mishnah, where we'll just learn the Mishnah, and it talks about which mitzvahs are dependent on Eretz Yisrael, can be done only in Eretz Yisrael, are only relevant to Eretz Yisrael, and which ones are in Chutz La'aretz. So the Mishnah gives the rule and the exception. The rule is anything which is dependent on the land, it has to do with growing from the land, is only negaya in Eretz Yisrael. Anything which is not land related is negaya both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. Now there are some exceptions of land mitzvahs which are relevant in Chutz La'aretz as well. What are those? So the Mishnah lists Arla, Kilayim, and Rabbi Elazar says also Chadash. The Gemara will explain what these are and explain the source for these on the next daf.